Hi everyone, welcome back to Life Technologies YouTube channel, and thank you so much for watching and supporting our channel. So this is another episode of our Huawei Lab simulation series, and in this episode we will be covering how to troubleshoot ISIS adjacency scenario 2. So in our last episode we saw that when you misconfigure the IP address, maybe you've configured the duplicate IP or you've configured an IP that is not reachable on the point-to-point link, then your ISIS adjacency will fail to come up. So there are other reasons, and we'll be discussing the second reason why your ISIS adjacency may fail to come up. So you have router 2 and router 4 in this topology setup. You've configured your ISIS protocol, display current configuration ISIS. This is okay. Display ISIS interface. You have ISIS activated on the interface. This is on R2. We go on R4. Display current configuration ISIS. Same. Display ISIS interface. You realize that your interfaces are activated with ISIS. You can check the interface configurations, or let's start by checking the point-to-point connectivity between R2 and R4. So on R2, display IP interface brief, you can see that on GE00, this is the interface that we should be checking. So we can do a ping 10.10.10.6, the local IP, then we ping .7 is the far end IP. So we are able to ping from R2 to R4, but our adjacency is not up. So when I display ISIS peer, you realize that we don't have an ISIS adjacency between R2 and R4 or R2 and R1. So we need to try and establish why the adjacency is not coming up. So if I display ISIS error, you can see that clearly it's indicating that we have a repeated system ID. This is on R2. On R4 we can do the same, display ISIS error. This one is also reporting that we have a repeated system ID. So when you are configuring ISIS, system ID, it's always mandatory. If you don't configure the system ID, ISIS adjacency will not come up. And again, if you configure a duplicate ISIS system ID, the adjacency will still not come up. So you always have to configure a unique system ID, and that is the reason why we always generate the system ID from the loopback IP. The loopback IP will always be unique. It will always be a different IP from the other loopbacks on the other routers. So when you are configuring the system ID, you need to generate it from the loopback interface, and then you ensure that it's unique. If you configure a duplicate, the adjacency will not come up. So from this error, you can see clearly that the adjacency is not coming up because we have a repeated system ID. If you rerun the command again, you can see that the errors are increasing. When we go back to R2, you also see that the errors are increasing, the error of repeated system ID. So this one clearly tells us that we have an error and the system ID is duplicate on the two routers, R2 and R4. So for us to be able to correct this, we need to check the ISIS configuration again, display current configuration ISIS. You can see that on this router we have this 01000010 01001001. When we check display IP interface brief, you realize that on this interface the loopback IP is set to .3. So our network entity should not be 1001, but it should be 1003. So we can correct this easily, ISIS 100, and then I can undo the configured network entity. So I can delete this. And then we can set the network entity, the correct one. So this one should be 3. If I display ISIS peer, you can see that now we have an adjacency between R2 and R4. And if you fail to configure the network entity, still the ISIS adjacency will fail to come up. So if I want to undo the configured ISIS, even if it's the correct one, this is .3, I need to delete .3, and then display ISIS peer. You realize that we don't have any peering. If you check the configurations, we don't have network entity configured. So for our adjacency to come up, first, we need to have a network entity configured. And second, the network entity should not be a duplicate on the two routers. Then our SIS adjacency will be able to come up correctly if there are no any other errors in our configurations. So I can configure back our adjacency, I mean our network entity, display ISIS peer, and now you realize that our adjacency is back up and running. So this is something that you need to pay attention to when you are configuring your ISIS protocol on any vendor. It could be Juniper, it could be Huawei, it could be Nokia. You always have to configure the system, the network entity, and the system ID should be unique. It should be unique on all the routers, and then your adjacency will come up without any problem. So this is scenario 2. Remember scenario 1, wrongly configured IP. Then scenario 2, we have discussed about not failing to configure the network entity, and second, configuring a duplicate network entity. These two reasons will cause your adjacency to fail to come up. I hope you've enjoyed this session. If you've done so, kindly remember to subscribe to our channel and also to share this content with your connections. And we'll see you in our next episode discussing another scenario that could cause ISIS adjacency to fail to come up. Thank you and see you in our next episode.